Kalispera se όλους. My name is Spiridula Dimitriou, and on behalf of the Greek Orthodox community of Melbourne and Victoria, it is my great pleasure to warmly welcome you here tonight to this evening's Culture and History Seminar, which is an online-only event tonight. I would like to begin by saying that the Greek community respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands upon which the centre is located, the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, and pays respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Next week, this seminar program is on Easter break, and on the recommencement of the series, which is on the 1st of May, the award-winning Australian journalist, historian and political activist, Paul Greenland, will speak to us on the life and ideas of Michael Pablo, the 20th century revolutionary and democratic socialist. On this very same date, I will transform back into our seminar series coordinator, Nick Dulles, who will be back from Europe, where he's currently working on research for his second PhD. At this point, I would like to commend Nick on the brilliant job he does in formulating the varied and intensely interesting seminar program. Tonight's seminar is an example of this and is presented by Dr. Tina Bucuvalas, who will speak to us from the USA on the topic of Greek music in America. We thank Anthony Sideropoulos for the kind donation, and also which has made tonight's seminar possible, and also an anonymous donation in the name of Michael Harris. Thank you to both our donors. Dr. Bucuvalas is the director of Florida Cultural Resources Incorporated, the president of Greektown Preservation and Heritage Association, and has held various curator roles over the years in Florida. Dr. Bucuvalas is the author, co-author, or editor of many publications, and I'm just going to list a few of them here. Greek Music in America, which circulated in 2019. We have Greeks in Tarpon Springs from 2016. There is the Florida Folk Life Reader from 2011. Just Above the Water, Florida Folk Art, which circulated in 2004, and South Florida Folk Life in 1994. Dr. Bucuvalas is currently working on an ethno-historical book about the largely Greek-led international sponge trade, and has conducted extensive field work over several decades with most groups in Florida, as well as the Native Americans in Arizona, ranchers in Wyoming, various groups in Maine, California, New Jersey, Islas Zapotec in Mexico, and sponge workers in Cuba, the Bahamas, Greece, Australia, and Turkey. Dr. Bucuvalas holds an MA in folklore and mythology from the University of California in Los Angeles, and a PhD in folklore from Indiana University. And now, just for a few brief words about tonight's subject, Dr. Bucuvalas' talk profiles the scope, practice, and development of Greek music in America, with attention to its relationship to ethnic identity. As a child of migrants, I experienced the music, both popular and traditional music, that the diasporic Greeks brought with them from their homeland. I saw it as a touchstone to my parents' identity. In fact, I considered the frequent arrivals of new records to the household, which were at times weekly, as being equal in importance as the letters we received from family in Greece. This music, these records, helped me locate our identity in a place that I really didn't have a very clear picture of. Greece in the 1960s, when I was young, when I was under 10, was a long way from Melbourne. Dr. Bucuvalas tonight will demonstrate that in Greek American communities, music has been an essential component in linking the past and the present, the distant to the near, and bonding members with an embrace of memories and narratives. From 1896 to 1942, an estimated 2,000 recordings were made in America, and thousands have since appeared. They encompass traditional music from all regions and emerging urban genres, stylistic changes, and songs of social commentary. And with that, I'd like to welcome our speaker and thank her for addressing us tonight.
Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to be here. I'm just sorry I can't see all of you, but Melbourne and Australia are definitely some of my favorite places in the world. And I do want to give a quick shout out to a couple of my colleagues there, Anthony Sideropoulos, and if he's at all watching, the great Dr. Stathis Gauntlet, who I have quite a bit of respect for. Thank you. So with that being said, I will, let's see, I'd like to share my screen so we can begin the talk, and I hope you'll all enjoy it. I have a lot of clips from some wonderful music of the past. Just a minute.
Dr. Bucuvalas, you've already shared your screen. Now you've unshared it. If you can reshare it, that'd be great.
Okay. Let me try that again. Oops.
Yes, great.
Okay. All right. Greek diaspora communities encompass a wide range of distinctive social phenomena, one of which is shared acoustic traditions, of course, such as music. And Greek diaspora communities have long been transnational in nature, physically, emotionally, and culturally. As one of our folklorists here, Joe Shiora, noted, sounds move, cross borders, and link bodies that might not otherwise be linked, that might be divided from each other. But sounds also stay put, engendering familiarity and intimacy, creating spaces and shared identity. And in the diaspora, music is an essential component of most social activities. As we heard, linking the past to the present, the distant to the near, and saturating the community with a web of information and memories. And for many whose roots are outside of the United States or other diaspora communities, music invents homeland. The diaspora brought to America the myriad permutations of traditional, popular, and art music in Greece. Traditional music shows historical influences from ancient Greece, Byzantium, the Ottoman Empire, and the Balkans. In fact, traditional music in Greece is probably the most complex in Europe because of all these different influences. But two streams of traditional Greek music share many influences and elements: Byzantine ecclesiastical music used in the Greek Orthodox Church, and folk music that includes both urban and rural traditions. During the early 20th century, a flood of immigration combined with commercial record production to generate an unparalleled documentation of ethnic music. From 1896 to 1942, more than 2,000 Greek recordings in many genres appeared in the US. And of course, thousands more have appeared since. They encompass not only traditional music from all regions, but also emerging urban genres, stylistic changes, and new songs of social commentary about the life of immigrants. The recordings were invaluable documents of community musical practices and preferences, which as I said, often depicted the daily lives of the people in the community and the problems that afflicted them. Songs dealt with numerous pressing issues, both inside and outside the community. Overall, as historian Dan Yorgakis said, music proved to be the most important cultural legacy of the immigrants. The Greeks who arrived in the massive waves of immigration to the US also had an enduring influence on the musical culture of Greece and other diaspora communities, especially those of Australia and Canada. What scholar Gail Holst noted regarding one genre was true of many. She said, the history of Rebettica, both as a recorded and live genre, has always been closely linked to the emigre communities of the United States, and we'll see why. So I'm going to proceed in from the earliest periods into the present. From the late 1880s to the early 1920s, about 500,000 Greek immigrants arrived in the US. Most came because of agricultural failures in Greece and an economy overburdened with refugees from the Balkan Wars and the Greco-Turkish War in the early part of the 20th century. The immigrants were over 90% male, and the majority never intended to stay. They found work in cities across the nation, as well as in railroad construction and the mines and factories of the West. In the early days, when they had almost nothing, sharing familiar music helped the immigrants cope with the separation from their families and homeland. And some, such as Cretan lyra player Haralaus Piperakis, recorded songs about their experiences. To West mentions boom towns Sacramento, Vallejo, Lodi, San Francisco, Salt Lake City, and Butte, Montana, and their work in mines, ranches, farms, and factories. We're going to hear a little bit of that. Just 1 second. And the reason this is Cretan music is Cretans in particular did go out, especially to Salt Lake City, and were working in the mines.
San Francisco, diga que estou San Francisco, diga que estou San Francisco, Colombiana querida de Briscoe. Sacramento que Magalhães, Sacramento que Magalhães.
So I hope you could all hear him talking about San Francisco, Sacramento, and Vallejo. That was Vallejo, which is another city in California. So, and my apologies, I'm recovering from a bad cold, so sorry about the coughing. Anyway, though 30,000 Greek Americans returned to fight for Greece during the Balkan Wars, the vast majority returned to the US. Their intention to build their lives provided an impetus for increased immigration by women and their other countrymen. Regional folk music in particular was a widespread performance genre, as we just heard from the Cretan music. Through these sounds that resonated of home, immigrants revisited their villages or cities and their memories of their loved ones left behind. Migratory work and separation were not new to Greeks, who endured centuries of outmigration to improve their lives or escape persecution. The song tradition about xenitia, which means foreign lands or being foreign, expressed their loss and desolation. The first musicians or singers in the US came from the very ranks of those who were working there for a better life. But professional performers soon also made their ways to the various Greek enclaves, labor camps, and coffee houses to entertain the often isolated men. But by 1910, the Café Aman tradition took root in major urban areas, providing venues by which immigrants socialized, ate, drank, and enjoyed music and dance. Instrument makers arrived early to support the musicians. In 1903, luthier Anastasios Stathopoulos established a workshop and later a showroom and factory on Manhattan's Lower East Side. And before 1910, Theodoros Karabas founded an instrument workshop in New York City. By 1910 also, Dimitrios Gratchis launched the Terpandros workshop in Chicago, and there were many more. Thomas Edison invented the phonograph in 1877, and by 1896, a man named Michael Araktingi recorded the first 8 documented Greek commercial records in New York for the Berliner label. The songs had titles such as Smyrna Serenade, Great Constantinople Song, and that had Turkish lyrics. So it shows that he was probably from Asia Minor. Early record companies manufactured and sold record players in the United States and in Europe and other places as well. And since they engaged in cultural marketing, European and later American-based record companies soon sent field agents around the world to record. By providing ethnic groups with their music, they encouraged continued purchase of their music and their gramophones. By 1919, an ad for Greek records appeared in Boston's Eastern and Western Review. With the development of these new technologies, the commercialization of Greek music took many forms: music cylinders, records, and mechanical music machines like music boxes or player pianos. Piano roll companies issued traditional and modern favorites, and piano rolls were fundamentally an American phenomenon, not as much a European phenomenon. And you can see this is a piano roll label on the right. In late 1916 or early 1917, Kyriaki Antonopoulou recorded 34 songs in Greek and sometimes Turkish for Columbia Records in New York. Known as Madame Kula or Kyria Kula, her recordings ignited the boom period of Greek recording in America. By 1918, Columbia issued a Greek record catalog featuring both domestic and imported 78 RPM records. Greek immigrant participation during that era in World War I revealed that the diaspora community had patriotic feelings for both Greece and America. 60,000 Greeks volunteered to serve with American forces, and many more returned to fight in the Greek military. They believed that the Megali idea of a Greek nation state encompassing much of Asia Minor would become reality with the defeat of the Ottoman Empire. And Eleftheria, or freedom, performed by Marika Papagika and other Greek vocalists, was based on George M. Cohen's World War I popular song, Over There. But the lyrics of Marika Papagika's song encouraged Greek-American doughboys to plant the Greek flag on Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. And we're going to hear a few bars of that. And if you're at all familiar with the original song, you can tell what it's based on. Oops, wait a minute. Let's go back. Okay. Well, in the period from 1918 to 1933, there were many troubling events. Offsetting the victory in World War I, the subsequent burning of Smyrna and expulsion of the indigenous Greek population from Asia Minor in 1922 signaled the end of Greece's immediate ambitions for a greater Greece. But at the same time, Greek musicians in America realized that they had a freedom of expression that was not permitted necessarily in the old world. Because as time went on, of course, there was the Metaxas dictatorship, which limited expression. And what's more, the relative wealth of diaspora Greeks made them a major audience for the arts. And the Greek community in particular bought more records than most other ethnic groups. They were relatively small compared to other groups, but they were one of the top buyers of music. So one of the most common early musical genres, which I mentioned, was Byzantine chant, performed as part of the Greek Orthodox liturgy. But in the US and elsewhere, priests and others began to compose new liturgical music, which abandoned the traditional Byzantine modes and single vocal line. This music had European scales and was presented in a westernized style with choirs and organs. One of the most prominent promulgators of this progressive style was Father George Anastasiou of Tarpon Springs, which is where I live, who formed the Damascenos Byzantine Choir. Today, at least in the US, both traditional and westernized forms are commonly performed. Moreover, the use of choirs created more active roles for women in the church, such as vocalists, choir directors, musicians, and composers. With the growing demand for Greek music came the appearance of sheet music, beginning with musician Spiros Bekatoros' 1914 collection and followed by others. Of note was New York's Apollo Music Publishing Company, which long issued sheet music consumed by musicians as well as amateur musicians and singers for picnics, theatricals, choirs, and other informal settings, such as household get-togethers. Immigrants soon established independent Greek record companies. The Pan-Hellenian Phonograph Record Company was founded by Madame Kula and her husband, lauto player Gus Antonopoulos, in New York in 1919. Violinist George Grachis and Santuri cymbalon player Spiros Stamos established Chicago's Greek Record Company in late 1922. Music released during this era included folk and popular songs, serenades, operettas, comedy, and religious music. Record companies, performers, and promoters often targeted specific niches within the diaspora through different genres. One important release of note: in 1927, Nikolaos Roubanis wrote lyrics for arguably the best-known Greek song, at least in the US, Miserlou, and Tetos Dimitriadis made the first recording. Of course, there were other songs commenting on social realities in the US, like a song by Tessia Dimitriadis about, doing as she pleased, bobbing her hair and smoking in public in the 1927 sensation Tos Cigaretto. But let's hear a few bars of the original Miserlou, because I'm going to come back to it with some later recordings and stylistic changes. And let me just say, although this was copyrighted in America and new lyrics were written, it was actually based on an Asia Minor folk song, as far as we know, as were many popular songs. So anyway, here's Tetos Dimitriadis' version.
ανάψει μες στην καρδιά. Άπια χαπίπι, άπια λελέλη, τα δυο σου χείλη θα ζουνε μέλη, αμά.
By 1925, Marika and Gus Papagica opened a nightclub in New York on West 34th Street near 8th Avenue. Marika's was arguably the first multinational cafe amman in the US. Since their music shared many characteristics, it attracted not only Greek patrons, but also Albanians, Arabs, Armenians, Bulgarians, Turks, Macedonians, Jews, and others. Moreover, the musicians who played in the Greek music groups then and now were never solely Greek. They included people of all those nationalities due to the similarities in their music. And for instance, in her club, Marika Papagica was known for singing the traditional song Armenaki with mixed Greek and Armenian lyrics. Let's see. I want to actually go on to the next slide for a minute. Singer, orchestra leader, and record company executive Tetos Dimitriadis had a major impact on Greek music here and everywhere. Born in Constantinople, he became the director of RCA Victor Orthophonics International Division. From March 1930 through December 1931, he made over 200 recordings in Greece, focusing on musicians and singers from Asia Minor and Athens. They included people like Rosa Eskenazi, Rita Abatsi, Delgas, and many more. The recordings not only made the performers household names in Greek America, but also showcased musical genres, mixed language lyrics, gypsy musicians, and topics like drug use and sex that were marginalized in Greece. Because remember, there was a lot of censorship going on there. So a lot of these records were released in the US, but not in Greece for some time. Dimitriadis also crafted records to appeal to wide audiences, often by combining a song from one genre on the first side with one from another on the second side. And he also translated popular American songs to fit Greek sensibilities. In Columbia Records, New York studios in January 1932, excuse me, Ioannis Halkias, known as Jack Gregory, recorded 2 bouzouki instrumentals, To Mysterio and Minore Tuteke. In 1933, he recorded 2 more. Not only were these the first widely popular recordings of bouzouki in Greece and America, but Halkias's musical interpretation became a significant influence on music subsequently recorded in Greece. And let me just say, he was quite an interesting character. If I remember correctly, I think he served time maybe in Sing Sing, an infamous US prison. He was sort of a minor mafioso, but, ahead of his time. And remember, before this time, the bouzouki, most of the instruments used were not bouzouki. They were violin or lira or clarino and so on. The bouzouki just became more prominent with the rise of Rebetica in recordings in the 30s. Excuse me. Music of the interwar era from 1933 to 1945 resounded with crises and uncertainties. Half of the early immigrants had already returned to Greece. Among those who remained, only half married, resulting in predominantly male communities. And some reacted to the Great Depression of this era by gambling, drinking, and shirking responsibility, which was given voice on commercial records. The genre most associated with this lifestyle was rebetika, and among songs that typified it were Miston Teke Tis Marigos by Dimitriadis, or Olimera Pezi Zaria, All Day Playing Dice, or Vangelis the Drunk by George Katsaros. Wait a minute, let me see if, and I'll go back and just play a few bars of In Marigos Teke by Dimitriadis. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the word teke, it sort of was like a dive bar where, you know, sort of people who were not so affluent, maybe minor criminals, the rebetes, the mangas, you know, hung out. And anyway, it was sort of a bar that didn't have such a great reputation, but that's where a lot of the great music was actually being played. The loss of their homeland and exiled to the Xenitia, as recorded on dozens of records by, especially by Asia Minor Greeks, found a ready market outside Greece. The common experience of exile linked all diaspora Greeks and contributed to the widespread popularity of the Xenitia genre, which was filled with longing for lost family, friends, and a cherished life in Greece. Often songs of Xenitia were coupled with those commenting on other social problems. The ravaging illnesses of tuberculosis or black lung experienced by those laboring in the American mines were so prevalent that they generated songs such as George Katsaros's Manamu Ime Thisikos, Mother, I Am Sick, in 1935. And if you don't know George Katsaros, I mean, he was really a prolific early recorder of Greek music in the US. And in fact, today there's a film crew coming to town in Tarpon Springs, where he ended up living, to film a documentary for Greek television about Katsaros, who was honored by the Greek government before he died at the age of 109, as far as we know. He sometimes lied about his age, in 1997, I believe it was. Other songs of the era dealt with returning to Greece to escape the deepening economic crisis or to flee an American society by which the immigrants were often rejected. But many returnees found that they no longer fit into Greek society. Men also returned to Greece to find brides, a practice that generated mixed emotions in Greece. Songs that were written in Greece, such as this one, Mimis Stelnis Mana Stina Meriki, Mother Don't Send Me to America in 1934, rejected the returnees. And many artists in the US and elsewhere also recorded this song. Although Greece repelled the Italian invasion on October 28th, 1940, it eventually fell to Germany in 1941. In the US, Archbishop Athenagoras' call for a Greek war relief effort was answered by thousands, with war rallies, home relief work, and war bonds sales that were occasions, again, for music and dance. Anti-Axis songs from Greece were often played, and sheet music was released by US companies such as Colonial Music Publishing, such as this song. In the period from 1945 to 1960, the devastation caused by World War II in Greece was followed by the Civil War, and that precipitated a second great wave of Greek immigration to the US. Between 1947 and 65, an estimated 75,000 legal Greek immigrants arrived on American shores. In addition, over 30,000 Greek sailors jumped ship from 1957 through 74. Post-war recordings reflected a wide variety of tastes, which were changing. The popularity of traditional music and European forms such as tango, foxtrot, and rumba expanded greatly. New York's Liberty Records became the largest independent Greek music label in the country. And among their early releases were mandolinata, or mandolin bands, performing folk and European music. Artists continued to release works also that combined Greek and American musical forms, such as a swing version of the traditional Kalamatianos, Tria Pedia Voliotica, in 1948, which was sung by Nikos Gounaris with John Raptis and his Aragon Orchestra in Chicago. Let's hear a little bit of that. It's really a great amalgamation of Greek and American forms.
Τρία παιδιά χωλιώτικα, τρία παιδιά χωλιώτικα. Μας φτιάξαν την Ανούλα, τσαρακατσανίσα. Μας φτιάξαν την Ανούλα, τσαρακατσανίσα.
And let me just say, my mother was from Chicago and would talk about going to the Aragon Ballroom, which was a big deal in Chicago. So it's significant that they had Greek music, in that major venue. Let's see, not too much later, in 1955, Topazuki Stina Meriki by Nikos Pouporakis, who played bouzouki, and Thodoros Kavorakis on vocals, signaled the escalating importance of that instrument during the era. The first major Greek LPs appeared in the late 1950s. Many were simply compilations of previously released 78s. But eventually, Greek promoters and musicians in the US released a flood of new music ranging from traditional to modern on LPs. The first Greek-owned company to release an LP was New York's Nina Record Company. They also brought musicians from Greece to record in their studios in New York, and then those musicians played in local clubs, and other American-based Greek record labels followed suit. Numerous new labels emerged. Steve Zamvilis founded Grecophone Records. Actually, it was initially started here in Tarpon Springs in the back of his family's gift shop down the street from where I live on Athens Street. And later, he formally established it in Gary, Indiana. Initially, they recorded island music because he and many of the people here were from the Dodecanese Islands. They initially Nisiotica, but later he included artists in many other Greek genres, including George Katsaros, Mitsakis Orphanidis, and Piperakis. Metropolitan Records recorded Virginia Makidou singing Asia Minor songs with Marcos Melkon on uti, Nikos Donev on violin, and Theodoros Kappas on kananaki. Melkon was an Armenian from Smyrna who also sang Asia Minor song styles in Greek, Turkish, and Armenian. During this era, music was presented in various formats, not just on records, but they had Horo Esperides, which were variety shows with music and dance. Cultural and fraternal organizations held regular dances and outdoor picnics, which featured live music, or sometimes they brought their gramophones out and played music out there. Hotels or music venues, as we've seen, Chicago's Aragon Ballroom, presented popular Greek nights. And there were several Greek resort hotels in New York's Catskill Mountains, which is famous for Jewish resort hotels, but there were Greek resort hotels too, where people would go during the summers to hear Greek famous vocalists and musicians. Greek nightclubs emerged from the tavernas. The dominant club music at the time was bouzouki-based, though clubs usually set aside time for visiting musicians to perform on other instruments and in other genres. In New York, clubs were concentrated in a few blocks along 8th Avenue. They included the very popular Port Said Cafe, Britannia, Egyptian Gardens, Alibaba, and Grecian Palace. And there were not just Greek clubs in that area, but also Arabic and Turkish clubs and so on. And hotels often offered Greek music in shows that featured two bands, one playing solely Greek music and the other that played a combination of Greek, ballroom, international. And this is one orchestra at Port Said. The reach of Greek American musical traditions was extended via the media of the day. So there were many radio programs in major metropolitan areas that had Greek formats. They presented the latest recording music, and many had house orchestras that performed sets or provided background music during announcements. Audiences also experienced Greek music in restaurants, clubs, bars, and sweet shops through jukeboxes. And I know, as I grew up in California, and my first introduction to Greek music was the Greek hours every weekend that my father would listen to on the radio. In 1958, Greek American clarinetist and orchestra leader Gus Valley recorded the first Greek LP on a major label. The Greeks had a song for it on United Artists. Valley's parents were from Asia Minor, but he grew up in New York, where he performed with Artie Shaw and Louis Prima. In the late 50s, he led a band that played Greek, American, Middle Eastern, and fusion music. In 1962, his LP, A Greek in Dixieland, devoted one side to such standards as St. James Infirmary and When the Saints Go Marching In, and the other side was solely Greek music. And we're going to hear a cut. the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act in 65, the US eliminated quotas on European immigrants, generating a stream of 160,000 new arrivals from Greece between 1966 and 79. At the same time, all ethnic groups in America were developing a renewed interest in their ethnicity, and it resulted in a recharged sense of identity among Greek Americans. Differences between the new immigrants and the long-established Greek Americans were sometimes reflected in their musical preferences or venues. Recent immigrants often took control of fraternal organizations, while churches remained the bastion of established diaspora communities. And in fact, even today, I still find frequently that there are events which are dominated by older communities from the early 20th century and post-war communities, and they don't always mix as often as you would think. New forms of instrumental music, song styles, and dance emerged during this era. Laiko, a type of urban folk music with an orientalized style, was popular in the 50s and 60s, along with a lighter version, Afro Laiko, and techno Laiko, or art music fused with folk rhythms and melodies, surfaced in the late 50s. And by the 1960s, films featured soundtracks by famous and techno composers such as Manos Hadjidakis with Never on Sunday in 1960 and Mikis Theodorakis, Zorba the Greek in 1964. Zorba became a Broadway musical in 68. Also popular during this era were trios playing a fusion of Latin American and Ionian Islands cantata styles. Trio Bel Canto, the most sought-after 1960s band, played Greek popular music for American audiences and eventually relocated from Greece to the United States. Bouzouki-based popular music dominated the 60s. In fact, a severe shortage of bouzouki players was reported in the press in 1961, the American press. Elektra Records released the acclaimed Greektown, USA albums featuring Babis Stergio on bouzouki and Tassos Halkias on clarinet, as well as Concerto for Bouzouki with Anestos Giftos Athanasiou and singer Anna Chrysafi. But Greek American audiences still wanted to hear regional and traditional music. So, for instance, Trio Bel Canto added reinterpretations of folk standards to their repertoire. And let's see, I've got a little cut here from Trio Bel Canto. If I can, let's see. Oops, I've just messed that up. Just a minute. Let's try that again. Okay, here we go.
Όλες φορτούνες περάσες κι από κοντά μας ήρθε ο χαρός να σε πάρει. And that was the great bouzouki player Takis Elenis on bouzouki. So in addition to nationally and internationally acclaimed bands, there were countless local or regional groups, many of which included both bouzouki and clarinet. On the left is Panayotis Halianis, the clarino player, and on the right is the Louis Fatimus Orchestra from the Ohio and Pittsburgh region in the 60s. Now, songs like Miserlou during this time and Never on Sunday became
a part of 1960s American pop, as well as of the Greek nightclub scene. All sorts of vocalists, American vocalists, recorded these numbers. Lebanese American guitarist Dick Dale's 1963 surf rock version of Miserlou was enormously influential and inspired performers throughout the world and in Greece, as illustrated by the note-for-note guitar rendition with vocals by pop star Anna Vissi at the 2004 Olympics. And this is an example of the constant loop of influence between Greek music from Greece and Greek music in the US and Greece. So, and let me just say, Dick Dale, you're probably familiar with him since, you know, surfing is big in Australia, you know, was the king of the surf guitar. And he was Lebanese, half Lebanese, half Polish, but his uncle, his Lebanese uncle, was an oud player, and he, in fact, played in his uncle's orchestra when he was a teenager. So this is his version, and is, in fact, the version of Miserlou that I grew up with in California. Okay, and so now next, and the sound is not good because I took it off. You know, I took it off the you know, a video on the internet, is Anna Vissi, and to me is just impressive that they would. This is note for note Dick Dale, so they went to the sort of American version as opposed to going back to Tetos Dimitriadis's version or other Greek versions. Okay, so during this time period, the 60s to early 70s in particular, there was a resurgence of Greektown club scenes across the United States. Never on Sunday and Zorba the Greek, and then Z generated a lot of mainstream interest in Greek music and created a lot of work for musicians. Because not just Greeks and people with similar music, but Americans were going to these clubs. So while most bouzoukia offered some traditional or older pop hits geared towards dance, they also featured celebrity vocalists singing Europeanized songs as headliners. And some believe generally today that Rebetiko died during this era. But in fact, I have seen in practice many Rebetiko songs were incorporated into the repertoire of dance bands that continue to perform them, but in an updated style that started to be played in the clubs. In addition to the updated styles, belly dancers were a popular attraction in these clubs because basically the mainstream attendees in the clubs, you know, didn't know the difference between Greek and Middle Eastern, really. But to accompany them, the Greek bands playing in the clubs played long improvisational pieces with a Turkish flavor. And in fact, many musicians, such as Yannis Tatasopoulos, incorporated a lot of Middle Eastern music. By 1975,
A significant quantity of music was imported from Greece, but American-based companies continued to record. During the 70s and 80s, and into about 1990, modern urban laika emerged and became the predominant popular style associated with the nightclubs. Many songs were sentimental ballads with rock and folk instrumentation similar to Western pop. And interestingly, during the period when the Greek military ruled from 67 to 74, the music of Theodorakis gained popularity as a protest against the dictatorship. And really importantly, with its rebellious lyrics, Rebetika was perceived as a way to express opposition to the oppressive regime and had a major resurgence. Exceptional Greek-American vocalists and entertainers entertained tens of thousands. I mentioned the trio Bel Canto, also based in Washington, D.C., and we'll see him later. Yannis Tadasopoulos, John Tadasopoulos was a stellar bouzouki musician and composer who not only performed Greek, but also melted it with Latin American and Middle Eastern rhythms, and often played with musicians like not just Greek American, but like with the Lebanese violinist Freddie Elias. As in Greece, young musicians of the time playing at clubs and events, such as bouzouki prodigy George Sophos, began to incorporate rock and roll elements. I'm going to play a few bars of one of his earlier recordings. And also they started using techniques with the bouzouki that were used on the guitar, like reverb and so on and so forth. But here's a few bars from an early recording, and I believe this is a traditional song, but performed rock and roll style.
Στην ψυχή μου είχα στα μάτια μου και πέφτουνε την άκρη. Είπα στην πόρτα σου θα έρθω για να σε βρω. Είπα στην πόρτα σου θα έρθω να δούμε. Μάξιμο τι μαλάσες και δίκης και με μάλωσες. Και τραβήξε το μάνταλο και με στην γωνιά. So George later calmed down quite a bit, and became known as one of as maybe the best American-born bouzouki player, and was really a stellar musician. And there were others, as we've heard, Takis Elenis, who dazzled audiences with performances that drew inspiration from jazz, rock, flamenco, and Indian music, or Alekos Galis, who began performing in Greek clubs, but his music evolved into a jazz Greek fusion directed at wider audiences. Traditional music during the 80s was sustained by Greek societies and folk dance troupes. Regional organizations held regular dances, stepping up demand for folk musicians. The old church picnics gave way to large Greek festivals that served as fundraisers for the churches, and were really mostly directed towards the mainstream population to learn more about Greek music and culture. Also in the US, sponsored by the National Endowment for the Arts, Ethnic Folk Arts Center, but also Greek Ministry of Culture, the Greek Music Tour presented concerts by outstanding performers in 10 major cities from 82 to 83. Greek nightclubs continued to flourish in major metropolises such as Milfetas and Grecian Cave in the New York area. The bouzouki bands played a mixed popular repertoire. In New York, New York was a primary location of small clubs they called boîtes, which were more acoustic than some of the other bouzoukia. On the West Coast, Greek Village and Athenian Gardens in Los Angeles were patronized not only by Greeks, but also, of course, Armenians and Jews. And with its large Greek community, Chicago supported a thriving music scene. Its Greektown boasted bouzouki clubs as well as sophisticated restaurants.
and clubs that featured and techno, the sort of art music. Denny's Den was the most famous, and in the early days was an artistic hub offering lectures, poetry readings, and discussions. And I'm going to play you just a few bars of some in techno music performed by a local musician. By the 1990s, the live presentation of Greek music underwent a major shift. Excuse me. Many who left inner city communities turned increasingly to American music. And as the demand decreased, the number of bouzoukia also diminished. Clubs and restaurants often switched to Greek nights as opposed to, every night of the week. To survive, most bands changed their focus from clubs to events such as festivals, weddings, baptisms, or dinner dances. Times became much more difficult for working musicians. As jobs and compensation decreased, so did the number of musicians in bands. Keyboards often replaced the rhythm section or lead instruments like the clarinet. Bands that once performed with 4 or 5 pieces were usually reduced to 3. The tradition of throwing money to tip the band, which was once a major source of income, musicians could make $1,000 a night, became less frequent and could not be relied upon as much. And disc jockeys often co-opted gigs that previously required live music. Moreover, as time went on, it's difficult to overstate the impact of 21st century digitally based media, because it enabled not only the broadcasting of music, but also communicating among musicians and their public, so often over great distances. So YouTube helped revolutionize the ability to post all sorts of video material, from archival historical recordings to entire channels devoted to artists. It entirely changed not just Greek music, but of course the music business. And at the same time, there was an increasing demand for old recordings in new formats, such as Arhuli's 2002 CD, Amalia, Old Greek Songs in the New Land, or the 2014 CD of recordings by Alex Zumbas from 1926 to 28, with a label designed by R. Crum based on Madame Kula's Pan-Hellenian label. In Greece, there's been growing recognition that the music produced in the US was a unique corpus that did incorporate all of these different musical traditions that we had in the US. Record collectors, academics, and even government agencies issued compilations of Greek American recordings, sometimes without proper authorization, such as this CD, Port Said Cafe. In other words, it was a pirated version, but with John Tatasopoulos, Freddie Elias, and others at the Washington, D.C. club of the same name. I'm just going to play you a few bars of... So today, Greek Americans are largely perceived as fully assimilated into mainstream American culture, but the persistence of Greek music in diaspora communities calls this notion into question. Modest music venues, often in restaurants, continually emerge, and many communities still preserve traditional music, such as Olimbites from Carpathos in Baltimore, who celebrate special events by composing improvisational mantinadas that comment on events. In Seattle, Christos Govetas led Dromino, which specialized in the music of northern Greece. You know, here in Tarpon Springs, you know, I started as one of my jobs was as the curator of arts and historical resources for the city of Tarpon Springs. And I started a lot of different music workshops to promote a younger generation learning musical traditions so it would not be lost. Dance is in pretty good shape because of the work of dance groups often associated with the church in the US, but there is no formal structure for young people to learn music. Anyway, and speaking of dance groups, it was really an important element in preserving musical traditions here in the US. Because in the 1970s, dance troupe directors created a model in which groups attended and hosted dance conferences or competitions. As I mentioned, this was picked up by the churches, so that most Greek Orthodox youth organizations associated with all of the Greek churches had their own dance group. And there are still annual conferences of groups coming from all over the country on the East Coast and on the West Coast of the US, where they can perform, exchange information, and meet other Greek Orthodox youth. And moreover, this provided a lot of work for Greek musicians. Let me say just a few words about the current repertoire in clubs, restaurants, or events. From personal observation, the standard repertoire includes a mix of older popular hits reaching back to the 50s, 60s, or also Rebettica classics performed in modern style, and traditional tunes, often from a region appropriate to the audience. So here in Tarpon Springs, where most people are from Kalymnos or other Dodecanese islands, we hear a lot of the favorites, you know, of Nisiotika from Kalymnos and nearby islands. You know, and it varies from community to community. This repertoire is often oriented towards an aging audience of post-war Greek immigrants, and also younger Greek Americans familiar with the older songs from community dances or dance groups. In addition, there are sometimes clubs that feature more modern Greek music. It's interesting to see also there's been a bit of revival of Greek musicians from Greece coming to perform in the US, kind of as it happened in the post-World War II era in this country, where in order to sustain themselves because of economic hard times in Greece, musicians would come and tour, you know, to Greek communities around the country. So in conclusion, I'd like to say, Greek American ethnic identity is complex and has changed over time. Today, most Greek Americans share basic continuing traditions, but some values and practices are tied to their date of immigration. Both because Greek culture itself has changed over time, and because a third or fourth generation Greek American will be more closely allied with an American ethos than a Greek ethos. In the early stages of immigration, music served primarily to bond Greeks and Greek Americans and reconnect them with their homes. Later, it was an essential element in creating and maintaining ethnic identity, both in terms of transferring information and values from generation to generation, and in creating contexts in which group cohesion was expressed. Music also played a strong role in expanding ethnic identity by incorporating stylistic elements from American and other cultures. In other words, music provided the basis for continuing construction and renegotiation of ethnic identities. Since Greek music arrived in America, there has been retention of traditional repertoire and forms, as well as major transformation and fusions. Some changes have been similar to those in Greece, and others not as much. Frequently, the changes entered the loop of musical influence that has long flowed between Greece and its diaspora. Some have decried these changes and modernization in instrumentation, style, and genre, but music anywhere never remains static. And this constant evolution can be considered proof that Greek music is still alive and well. Thank you. And with that, I will try to escape.
Here we are. Dr. Bucuvalas, thank you so much. You covered such a wide range of topics there, and many times I had a question formulated in my mind, but you answered it as you went along. So that's fantastic. I was particularly interested to learn how far the mixing of genres actually took place in America. The Newsiotica with the Dixieland music, the gypsy musicians too. Was interested in hearing about them. Did they bring the tradition of the clarinet with them, the gypsy musicians?
Well, I'm not sure that clarinet was confined to gypsy musicians. I'm not sure that Gus Valley, for instance, I haven't heard that he was gypsy. He was from Asia Minor. His family was from Asia Minor. And as I said, in the pre-bouzouki days, the clarinet was a fairly common instrument throughout Greece, as was the violin in a lot of musical traditions. But certainly, even today, there are quite a few musicians, and I know several here who do have gypsy backgrounds, just as is true in Greece also. And you cannot, in the wonderful clarinet player, really, maybe the best in Greece is Thanasis Vasilopoulos, does come a gypsy background. But I'm just not sure it's confined to that group.
Thank you. You used, Anthony has got a question for you, but before I read out Anthony Sideropoulos' question, you used the expression music invents homeland. And I just want to ask, did American recordings actually sell in Greece?
Yes, because well, for instance, when Tetos Dimitriadis recorded all of those great musicians, and he did it for a record label that had an international distribution. So they were not immediately distributed in Greece because of the Metaxas dictatorship, but eventually they were, because there were international distribution points.
Oh, yes. And could you tell us a little bit more about the Greek resort hotels? Because we haven't had those in Australia.
Well, have you heard previously about the Catskills? It's a mountainous area outside
the Catskills. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't think they're going anymore, but and I only know a moderate amount about them, but I do know, musicians people would go there, especially from New York City, who are desiring a less urban environment, would go there during the summer for a period of time. And so they would hire the best bands that they knew about to go to entertainment and draw even more people to those resort hotels. And I think, one of them was called Sunset Hills, and there were at least two. I'm not sure if there were more, but I've heard about two, and I've even seen flyers for it.
So were they targeted to a Greek audience, or?
Yes.
Oh, they were.
Entirely.
Wow, that's amazing.
At least these two hotels, and there were probably a few more, but I think the majority in the Catskills were targeted to Jewish audiences.
Okay, and sorry, Anthony, one more question from me. Dr. Bucuvalas, could you talk a bit about the archives that are being formulated at the moment. I have no longer the records that my parents had. They've been lost along the way in between many shifts of houses back and forth from Greece and what have you. But could you talk a bit about the archives that are being developed at the moment?
Yes, and this is an issue of some concern for me also. There have been several existing collections of Greek music scattered in different places throughout the U.S. For instance, there's some in the Hellenic Museum, which is largely unaccessioned. There's some in Santa Barbara, which has a historic Greek music collection, but it's not a large collection. There's some at Harvard, but people outside of Harvard don't always have access to this collection. So because of that, myself and a couple of colleagues, especially the Greek music historian Meletios Pouliopoulos, who lives in the Boston area, who has probably the biggest collection of Greek recorded music at this time. Anyway, I wrote a grant, which was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts about 5 years ago, to create a large collection of Greek recorded music, which we had acquired. I had acquired, he had acquired, another colleague had acquired, and we took it and donated it to Meleti sort of indexed it to the Archives of Traditional Music at Indiana University, which is devoted to traditional music of all kinds and already had a bit of a Greek collection. 2,000 items, because like in your family, these record collections are being lost daily, as older people die, younger people may not be interested. And that's how I acquired. I mean, I donated over 500 items, and I've since given away many, many more that were just given to me because people knew of my interest in Greek music. But in just last year, but there are archives that have grown up in Greece itself, and they are far and often devoted to music recorded in the United States by the record companies. They actually have the biggest collection, I believe, at the Kounatis archives in Athens, developed by the Kounatis family. First the father, and now the son is in charge of the archives. Also, the University of Ioannina, there's a music division in Arta with some excellent ethnomusicologists working there, Kokonas and Ordoulidis and others who have working on an archival collection and also have been working with the Kounatis archive. And I believe this has the most forward-thinking way of allowing people to access Greek music and more information about the artists and the particular recordings than anything else. And we've put together a project with this team of Greek scholars and a team of American scholars and ethnomusicologists. We're hoping to get funding, but with things the way they are in the US, funding's looking a little grim right now, but maybe, even though the Greek government has approved this project, it was a collaborative Greek and American project to better accession the collections here and developed ways to link our collections here and in Greece. So they'll be available for everybody around the world.
Well, I hope benefactors are found that can support such an important project. But Anthe asks, what percentage, or were all these early musician releases signed to record labels? Were there any musicians or groups documented without commercial attachments?
Yes. And hello, Anthe. Lovely that you are there. There was quite a bit of informal recording. As I mentioned, for instance, I know the work particularly of Savas or Steve Zambilis, who founded Grecophone Records initially here in the back of his family's gift shop where he bought a Wilcox Gray early recorder and was recording local musicians and selling the records back to them, you know. And of course, this happened here, but it happened all over the country. But of course, those did not necessarily have the wide distribution of commercial labels. And then there were people like myself and earlier scholars who recorded local bands and events. And then, for instance, Library of Congress also during the WPA years. Well, the collection was not in the Library of Congress at that time, but it is now. In order to create work during the Great Depression, the Works Progress Administration hired scholars to go around recording community musical events. And the documentation of that work in the late 30s and 40s is available, particularly the Greek stuff, on the Library of Congress website of the American Folklife Center. And there are other informal recordings of other ethnic communities there also. But I just don't think there's a lot of collections, and as there was not a lot of distribution of these informal recordings.
Thank you. We've really run out of time, but I just want to ask one more thing. You identify that there's no formal structure for young people to learn music in America, and it's a bit like that here as well. I mean, lots of students learn, well, there's very few Greek schools here that actually provide the opportunity for students to actually pick up instruments and learn Greek music. Have you got any idea how we might be able to remedy that situation?
Well, you know, the way that dance became so associated with the churches and the Greek Orthodox Youth Association, I mean, I think if they expanded to music, that would be a fantastic thing. And I think it happened with the dance. Actually, one of the people behind that whole movement was a man here in Tarpon Springs again, you know, which is kind of has the largest percentage of Greek inhabitants of any community. Not the largest community, but the largest percentage of Greek inhabitants. This is why a lot of things happened here. He kind of started that movement, and I think we probably need someone doing a similar thing in association, probably with the churches, because the churches have always served not just as religious hubs, but really cultural hubs for the Greek communities throughout the country. But I think there's room for other kinds of regional organizations which do offer music lessons sometimes, but on a scattered and not very sustained kind of way. You know, I think I would love to see that happen a lot more, both with the church and with other communities. But I think there have to be people, just individuals, who decide to take this up.
Yes, and it's an expensive endeavor, so it has to be commercially viable too, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, I ran things here. I ran music workshops for 10 years on a shoestring. You know, I got grants regularly, yearly, from the National Endowment for the Arts that funded not just that. All you have to do is pay the instructor, you know, and then the students can pay. I mean, I did them for free. The students had to pay nothing, but you could charge the student a small amount. It doesn't have to be that expensive. It's just an organizational issue.
Yeah. I'm going to have to bring the evening to a close, Dr. Bucuvalas. Thank you so much. It was all very edifying. I hope that you can talk to us again in the future. We thank you for your time. To our audience, I say I hope you can all join us when the seminar series commences again on the 1st of May. I bid you all good night. Καλό Πάσχα from Melbourne, and good evening.
Thank you.